Hey, Alysa, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Hey, so I wanted to talk about a couple things. One is that Biden's latest EO about not selling data to countries of concern. I can tell from your face a little bit that maybe you had the same reaction I did, which is, I don't know, what is this exactly? It seems super narrow. And also, were we doing that? Were we selling data to whoever these countries of concern were? North Korea, I think, was mentioned. So I was curious what you thought about it.
Well, there are two parts to that headline, right? So, like the first part is location data, be careful in terms of who you sell it to. And that we've already heard the FTC has really been active in that space. But the second part of the EO that probably didn't get as much attention is like, don't sell it to particular countries. And those are countries that there are already restrictions on engaging in commerce with, right? In terms of Russia and North Korea. So I think the import of that probably is going to affect a whole lot less businesses. Um, but I think it's maybe just general water cooler on, the trend line in one direction that sensitive data, location data, that you've got some extra responsibilities in terms of how you manage that data and certainly how you monetize that data.
Yeah, like election coming up. What's the least I can do to say that I care about data privacy is probably this. But like, that was my first impression, and it's super narrow. And also like EOs, right? We talked about this.
Right.
There's not a lot of power behind them, and so this is all they could do maybe. But then let's give them get some political capital and do it in a way that's kind of obvious. But it got me thinking, okay, but what about just data sharing at home? Right, in the US and countries that aren't of concern, like shouldn't we address that? But then I found this like little research study by Duke and Justin Sherman and team over there, and they talked about how much data brokers could sell like secrets about the military, not secrets, well, personal data on people in the military. And I didn't realize how extensive that was, and so it got me thinking that could be a hole that Biden's trying to plug here.
Yes and no, though, right? Like, I mean, I think we have law enforcement in the US that absolutely wants access to that data. So
Hmm.
and we
Yeah.
haven't really addressed that issue. So that's the balance.
Do you think this is the start of that conversation, or
No.
yeah, it's not right?
Well, I mean, the start of the conversation is having a national privacy law, right? Having a baseline standard that applies to the country, right? Not
Yeah.
specific sectors. And there's not power behind that. There's not momentum behind that.
There's a part of me that was like, I hope she says yes to that, and it's like bigger part that was like, there's no way she's gonna say yeah.
Nope,
It's a
nope.
great step. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for keeping it real. Hey, I wanted to talk to you about Anderson versus Stability AI. I know it's a copyright case, but I wanted to draw some parallels into privacy. But bit of a background there. So I've been screwing around in Midjourney, building a ton of images. And this weekend I started screwing around with, well, his surveillance capitalism in the style of, famous artists, right? Like Roy Lichtenstein, all this kind of stuff. And they produced really cool images. And then I started thinking, hey, is this cool actually? Because it's for me, I'm inspired by these artists, right? And so it's a cool kind of tribute. But in another way, like maybe it's copying. And as I went down that rabbit hole, I got to Anderson versus Stability AI. And Anderson is a group of artists. And basically, the judge there didn't quite dismiss the case, but basically dismissed the case and then said, come back if you have more info. But as you unpack it, he told the artist to come back, but as you unpack it, he said, how do you know that Stability AI is using your images exactly? And I'm like, how are they supposed to know that? Then he said, my bar here is to figure out if the generated artwork could be considered a fake. Now, if the artists are dead, like, of course it couldn't. And there's like a ton of provenance with this kind of stuff. So you're never going to really think that that's fake. Also, it's not a painting, it's digital. And then kind of had this drop in the ocean argument like, hey, your image is one of billions. How could that possibly be part of this? But then when I look at the images I created, they're so obvious that they're in the style of those artists. And to bring it back to privacy, and sorry for the long kind of story here, we're throwing our data into these models, but it is one of billions of data points. And does it get to the point where that doesn't matter, right? Are the courts kind of leaning in that direction? Yeah.
Right. So one, I would just say anytime you have new issues, the courts, we have multiple levels. And we always say it's like very much the Wild West at the district level, right? You'll have different courts really reach different conclusions as we try to identify both what the standard is and how does it apply given these set of facts. So I think we're at the very beginning, definitely not a consensus on even where the law nets out on that as to copyright. But as to data, I mean, that is a live issue in terms of what are the responsibilities. We talk about data inputs in your model and outputs. And if your information is helping power, like there are all sorts of stories of like, it's de-identified and yet it can be extracted out, right? You ask the right query and you get actually information about you. And so that's part of what California, the kind of forthcoming rulemaking is really going to address with automated decision making. Like, what is the responsibility? For example, consumer says, delete my data. What is the responsibility for the data about that person that was input into the model? And that goes into like it's data governance too, right? Like what's the data that you retain to go back and test the model? So I think it's a very live question, both on like what should you do and then what will you have to do as a result of laws. And that is not clear yet, but that is what is being discussed. And I think we will get some standards around that over the next year or two.
What about metadata? And then kind of the context for my question there is we've been thinking a lot about frameworks and how data can be used for AI. And I had some great conversations with Gartner and Forrester and others, and kind of where we landed is if you have a data set that's findable, right? You know exactly where the data is, you've got good data discovery, it's describable, right? And so come back to describable. And then it's like you can stamp it with your governance, right? It's you can send it in a secure way via API wherever it needs to go. And you can make its quality better. Like these are 5 things that you have that stuff. And I think there's a gap in the market for this. You're doing AI well. But on the can you describe it part, and back to stability AI, there was the way they kind of got around it was to say, I'm not actually copying this art. I'm unpacking the attributes of what makes Frida Kahlo. And I'm like, isn't that the same? And so I'm wondering if just having the metadata, is there enough protection for that? Or does that not matter? See where I'm going? I know
I do. And I'll just take back to the privacy context. That's inferences. And we say inferences are absolutely regulated when it's inferences about a person. And so like metadata, we've seen this in the data security context, the shadow data, like you're still responsible for it. And so I think it really puts the onus on understanding what data you have and how you are using it. And it's not enough to say, no, I don't have your data anymore. If you really are creating a robust profile of a person, but for their name, like that's not a new issue. That's like pseudonymous data.
Inferences. You know, this is one of those words that I've heard you say months ago, and it never really clicked until now. I appreciate that. Well, Alysa, thanks. Anything else you wanted to cover that was interesting this week?
Oh my goodness. Well, I will just put a note. There was an interesting post by the FTC director of the Bureau of Consumer Protection on, they've done a lot of recent enforcement on location data and browsing data. And there was just some language that I think a lot of people took to say, is browsing data sensitive, full stop, right? That was the magic line. And if that's the case, then that would make all targeted advertising opt-in, which that's not the standard today, right? The FTC has rulemaking that's going to affect targeted advertising. And I think just that kind of language creating confusion over what data, what's the standard, what do I have to do? Like that is the problem we have in the US. We don't have a national framework, and you have businesses who are like, just point me in the direction of what I need to do. And they're following different states. And then you have these like different press releases that pop out that suddenly at least make you question, actually, was I wrong? Is it all about this? And I don't think that's helpful from a policy standpoint. I really don't.
Yeah, and to add to that, Alysa, I don't know if it was a press release or Lena Khan was doing a speech somewhere, but she talked about data for training models. You just can't, hey, there's no longer I'm just training my model excuse. Like she basically went out there and said, you can't do it, I'm watching this. But I don't know how formal that was. We'll post it in the links maybe.
Yeah. that was like the clip where they're like, don't retroactively change your privacy policy quietly. But the clip she said really didn't pull in that context. So it does leave open that question. Wait, what did you mean? And not easy for businesses.
No. And getting a little more opaque, right? It seems like. Okay. Well, let's try to unpack it next week, at least dig into those two issues.
Sounds good.
All right. Hey, good to see you. Have a good one.